Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for spending your PyCon time with me here today. Again, like we just said, my name is Pandy Knight. I'm the Automation Panda. Currently, I work as a principal developer advocate at a company called Tools, where we focus on automated visual testing. I also run a free community program called Test Automation University. It is powered by Tools. You can go there and take free online courses on all topics testing and automation related. We even have a Python programming course on TAU. So Tools is awesome. Please check them out. They're my employer. I'm thankful that they brought me here today. But here at the Microsoft booth, we're going to talk about how you can automate your tests in Python with this awesome new tool from Microsoft called Playwright. Now, Playwright is a modern web test automation framework. I'm sure many of you have probably heard of Selenium. Selenium is awesome. It's been around a while. But Selenium is not necessarily a full test framework. Selenium is a browser automation tool. Playwright is meant to provide a much richer experience than a basic tool like Selenium. The way Playwright works is it manipulates the browser via debug protocols. So it's kind of going through the back door, and that lets it be very, very efficient in how it can execute. If you do benchmarks comparing execution times between like Selenium, Cypress, Playwright, or some of the WebDriver I/O, you will see that Playwright as well as Puppeteer are always much, much faster in terms of execution time. It is an open source project maintained by Microsoft. There's a team of, I believe, 6 engineers around the world who work on it, as well as a developer advocate, Debbie O'Brien. She's awesome. If you wanted to contribute to Playwright, they're more than happy to accept pull requests. The browsers that Playwright works on is a little different than, say, Selenium. Selenium works on full browsers like Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge and Mozilla Firefox. Playwright takes a leaner approach. Playwright works on browser engines. So instead of testing Chrome directly, you're actually going to be testing Chromium. It's still the same browser rendering engine, the same JavaScript, all that stuff in there. So it's mostly the same. There might be little nuances of differences, but the same goes for Playwright can test Chromium, it can test Firefox Gecko, and it can test WebKit. So you're hitting the major browser engines and projects. Another really cool thing about Playwright is that you can test your APIs with Playwright as well as your web UIs. That's full, baked in, built in. I think it might use requests under the hood. I'm not super sure. But you don't need to have like a separate test project or bring in an extra library. Playwright gives you UI and API out of the box. And one of my favorite parts about Playwright is that it does support multiple languages. There are bindings for Python, for JavaScript, for Java, and for C#. So whatever stack you're in, you can probably use Playwright in your own native language. Of course, we're all here at PyCon. We probably love Python, am I right? Yeah, so I'm going to be demoing it in, of course, Python. Now, before we get into a demo, I just want to talk a little bit about the setup and the way it works, because I already have a project, so I can't step through it there. In order to set up Playwright, you just pip install, right? There's pip install for the Playwright package, pip install for PyTest, because we need the runner and the executor. And then they also provide a PyTest Playwright plugin that gives you a lot of stuff, batteries included. So a lot of, like some of the fixtures we're going to be using, some of the command line options, that all comes from that PyTest Playwright plugin. It's really cool. It's batteries included. In fact, if you just do pip install PyTest Playwright, it brings in the other dependencies as well. I just wanted to show them like these are what's inside. Once you install your packages from pip, the next thing you want to do is install those browser engines. A very nice feature of Playwright is that it handles browser installation and management for you. With Selenium, you probably remember back in the day, you'd have to get a WebDriver executable, then you'd have to put it on your system path. Now, granted, Selenium now has something called WebDriver Manager that does that for you. But Playwright has its own kind of manager, and you just run that with the Playwright CLI that comes with installing it through pip, and you run Playwright install. This will install Chromium, Firefox Gecko, and WebKit on your local machine. The latest versions, they keep all the versions synced, so you don't have to worry about more than doing this. I will say, make sure you're connected to a fast network, because if you're in a conference center with slow Wi-Fi, then it might take a long time to download these things. But if you're on like, fast Wi-Fi, boom, you'll get it no problem. Now, the way that Playwright handles its browsers, not only does it handle browser engines, but the setup and cleanup are actually a bit optimized. Traditionally, with web test automation, you would want like one instance of the browser and one instance of your executable per test. Because if you share that between multiple tests, then you have test case dependencies that could cause things to break, and things could go very bad. So it's usually the best practice that, let's say with Selenium WebDriver, you would start a browser instance and a WebDriver instance at the start of the test and then tear it down at the end. And so you have a lot of time setting up, tearing down, setting up, tearing down, setting up, tearing down. Even if it only takes a few seconds per test, if you've got suites that are hundreds or thousands of tests large, these are minutes and hours and even days of time that you are just burning. Playwright's approach is to say, let's do something smarter. So we have for the entirety of your test run, you will have one browser instance of, say, Chromium. And what Playwright does is for every test is it peels a browser context out of that instance. A browser context is kind of like an incognito session that is protected. It has its own storage state, it has its own cookies, it has its own session. So you can have multiple contexts peeled from one browser instance. And browser contexts are lightning fast to spin up and tear down. So you don't have that multi-second hit per test. And you can even run tests in parallel using different contexts within one browser instance, which is really cool. Then within a browser context, you can have multiple pages. Typically, when we are interacting with our web application, there's a page that we load, and so Playwright provides a page object through which we do all interactions. Most tests will only ever need one page, just like most tests will only ever need one context, but you can have multiple pages within a context. For example, you might be testing an app where you click a link and it opens up in a new tab, right? Oh, now you have to go handle two tabs at once. So that would be a case where you would maybe have a test with two pages. If you're familiar with Cypress, if anybody has used that before, Cypress can only handle one page or tab at a time, right? That's an inherent limitation. Even on their website, they say, we will never have more than one tab support. Playwright, you got it all, baby. It's wonderful. So, personally, I do recommend using Playwright as your browser automation tool in Python. I absolutely love it. I am a Playwright ambassador. I was the first Playwright ambassador. It's not to say that I don't like the other tools. I think all the other browser automation tools, Selenium, Cypress, Playwright, Puppeteer, WebDriver IO, the list goes on and on. I think they're all great. They all have pros and cons. They all have use cases. When I am doing test automation in Python, my personal preference is Playwright first. I do that because I think it is fast, like we said, execution time. It is safe because it has things like automatic waiting built in. It is very straightforward. I find the API to be very Pythonic. I can just control space away in VS Code, and it's like, even if I don't know the exact method or name of what I'm trying to do, I can usually find it very quickly, whereas in other tools I might not be able to do that so readily. Last year at PyCon here in Salt Lake, I actually gave a tutorial on Playwright with Python. And if you want to check that out, here's a QR code as well as a link. This GitHub repository has full instructions for how to do that. It's going to go into much deeper depth and detail than I will in this time that we have today. So please check it out if you're interested. Also, real quick before I go to the demo, if this is all really cool and you want to hear more about testing, I am giving a talk on which web test framework should you use at 3:15 in room 355 ABC. That I'll get into more detail about the other tools so you can have a better pros and cons comparison. And then immediately following that at 4 p.m. in room 251C, I'll be holding an open space. Let's just talk about testing. So if you've got challenges, you've got insights, you've got cool things you want to share, meet me there. I'll be there. I have stickers. I have swag. I don't have swag. I have stickers, and I have really cool postcards of Japanese art if you want some of those to entice you to come. So let us jump into code. So what we're going to do today is we are going to automate some Playwright tests together. We're going to show raw Playwright. I'm also going to show you how you can add visual assertions with Apply tools for automated visual testing, which is really cool. But before we can jump into the test project itself, we need a web app to test. Am I right? Yes. So I could go out to Google or DuckDuck, whatever, Facebook, but I actually made a little app that I now use for testing. It is what I call the Bulldoggy Reminders app. This is named after my French bulldog. Her name is Suki. This dog is so cute. Ask me for pictures in the open space later. But basically, this is a web app I have built as a full stack Python application. It is fast API underneath. I use TinyDB and Pydantic models. And for the dynamic interactions that you see, that is all in HTMX. So I don't have to directly code any JavaScript for the stuff that I'm going to show you. It is full stack Python. I gave a talk about this in PyTexas. I can share a link about that later. But anyway, here's my login page. I generated this logo with DALL-E. I generated the HTML and CSS with ChatGPT because I'm not a front-end developer. I can cosplay as one, as we are seeing right now. But I'm going to type in my username, Pythonista, and I'm going to type in my password, I heart testing. We're going to log in. Oh, I can share a link to this example project as well on GitHub if you're interested. And so here now we come into the Reminders app, and we have the top bar, the title bar. I can log out if I want. On the left side, I have a card with reminder lists, and then on the right, I have the reminders for the selected list. I can select or unselect things. I could add new ones, pick up, I don't know, the dog. I can add things, I can delete things, all dynamic, all the interactions underneath are HTMX. I can switch my list, so if I want to add a new list, that's totally cool too. So this is basically the application that we're going to test. I'm now going to flip over to Visual Studio Code. Is that code big enough for everybody to see? Do I need to make it a little bigger? A little bigger? Yeah, here we go. How are we doing now? Is that better? Awesome. Let me pull down the terminal a little bit, get that out the way for now. So here, this is the repository in GitHub, the Bulldoggies Reminders app. You can go to Automation Panda / Bulldoggy Reminders app, check it out, clone it, give me some stars. The app code is together with the test code. I strongly recommend co-locate your test code with your app code. That way it's all version controlled together. Then, I don't want to go into the app code so much. That's a whole nother talk. Close those up, templates, yep, we don't need that. I want to focus on the test code. So I'm sure most people have probably used PyTest before. Show of hands. Okay, very good. Yeah, PyTest is awesome. PyTest is my favorite test runner for Python. It is my favorite test runner of any language, and I use many of them. I like it because simple is better than complex. I love it because of functions versus test case classes. There's a whole bunch of reasons. But we're using PyTest with Playwright. So many P sounds. PyTest, Playwright, Python, plugin, bleh. Here we are. So in PyTest, you will have a tests folder that, by convention, that will have all of your test modules. And so you see my test modules, test underscore these different things. What I am doing with this test, I have some input fixtures. Where should I go with this? Let me backtrack a bit. So, whenever you do your tests, you usually don't want to hard code your usernames and passwords and base URLs in your code, because then you can't run them across different environments. You need to provide them as an input somehow. There are many ways you can do that. You can create custom PyTest command line arguments. You can use environment variables. You can use config files. You can use a secrets management service, something like Azure Key Vault, or there's a really cool new company out there called Doppler that manages your keys for you. Check them out. I'm being very basic and simple and unsafe. I'm using a JSON file to store my inputs. So here I have my base URL configured. I have some users that are already configured in the app with their usernames and passwords. Yeah, you can break into my app, but it's only running on my local machine, so no big deal. What I do is I will read these inputs in through PyTest fixtures. They come in through a conf-test.py file. And so here I have a fixture. It has session scope, meaning it will run only one time for the entire test suite rather than per test. That'll be wasteful. Get my test inputs. Beautiful thing, simple is better than complex in Python. I can read a JSON file into a dictionary in 2 lines. Yes, thank you, Python. So what I do, I have a fixture that reads that inputs file and returns a dictionary for those values. And then I use that test inputs fixture in other fixtures to parse out things like the base URL. And so I have a base URL fixture. I'm just doing some assertion to make sure you actually provided it, so that I don't run like 20,000 tests only to find out they all failed because you didn't give the input, right? I also parse out my my primary user from that. I have a helper method for that. It just gets the index, does some more error checking. So basically I'm constructing a user object. So what I can do with all of that then is when I come to my test, I have this module test UI, I can write a basic login test, import some stuff, that's cool. We're going to use the Playwright Sync API. You can do sync or async with Playwright. If you're doing browser automation tools, you probably want to do async. If you're doing basic test automation, you probably want the sync API. The plugin for Playwright will give you sync API for the fixtures by default. Sync is just, it's straightforward. You don't need to do all these crazy waiting task things. So I use the sync API with my tests and it's okay. So here is a test function. In PyTest, we always prefix test underscore or suffix. I'm passing in these fixtures. The page fixture comes from that Playwright plugin. That's what's going to create a browser instance, peel a context and give you a page object automatically from that. I don't have to explicitly set that up. I'm getting my user from the fixtures. Now I'm not getting the base URL from the fixtures because with that plugin, that dependency, it sucks in another PyTest plugin that lets you customize the base URL so that as long as you have a fixture named base URL and you return a string that is your base URL, Playwright will just automatically use that when you try to navigate to a page. So I don't have to type out http://127.0.0.1, I can just use the resource paths. So that's really cool. Again, Playwright focuses not only on speed, but on developer experience. And so this is a very nice facet of developer experience where the framework is working for you. It gave you the page to interact with, it handles the base URL for you, all baked in, it's very nice. So let's step through this test a little bit more. What we're going to do is we're just going to test a basic login. I like to write my test cases using the arrange, act, assert pattern. Has anybody heard of that? Arrange, act, assert? Oh, this is good. This is good. So we want our tests to be independent and atomic. Every single test case we write should focus on one unique, individual, independent behavior in our app. Here, we're focusing on the behavior of a successful login. The more behavior we try to cram into one test case, the longer it becomes, the more fragile it becomes, the more resources it takes to maintain, and the more confusing it becomes, right? Simple is better than complex. If that test case fails, how do I know which behavior failed if it's covering multiple behaviors? That's why we want to focus on individual independent behaviors, and a great pattern for doing that is the arrange, act, assert pattern. So with arrange, act, assert, we arrange something as part of setup, we act on the behavior that we expect, and we assert the expected outcomes from it. It's also very similar to a construct from behavior-driven development called given, when, then, or the Gherkin language. I'm sure many people have heard of that. So you will see in most of my test cases, I actually write out the steps in plain language using given, when, then, which conforms to arrange, act, assert, before I ever write code. So my test case, given the login page is displayed, when the user logs into the app with valid credentials, then the reminders page is displayed, and the reminders page title card displays reminders for the user's username. That's simple, it's understandable, it doesn't matter if you know Python or not, this is a specification of proper behavior. Now what I'm going to do is implement the test for this specification, and we are going to use Playwright for that. So, page.goto will load your page, that's like a navigation. And it kind of waits a little bit for it to boop, pop up. So, in order to log in, what do I need to do? I need to use my page, I need to use locators to find elements on the page. So here I'm just using CSS selectors. Thankfully my inputs, I have names for them, the username input, the password input. And then with that, I'm then going to fill text from my username and password. So in this, it seems pretty simple, right? It seems pretty cool. Autocomplete all the way through. There is safety built into this because Playwright will automatically wait for this particular input field to be rendered on the page before attempting interaction. What could happen if you didn't have that waiting is test flakiness. The page might not be loaded, the automation has a race condition, it could land there first, it tries to send fill the text before the element is there, explosion, element not found, right? Painful, painful, painful testing experience. But with Playwright, you don't have to explicitly handle your waiting. It's all handled underneath the hood. I think it's a 5-second timeout by default. You can tweak that in configuration. But yeah, it lets you focus less on the automation details and more on the interaction details. So I'm using those locators here. Once I type in my username and password, I want to click the login button. This is one of Playwright's new kinds of locators. You can use traditional locators like ID, CSS selectors, XPaths. It's all good. But Playwright now has a nicer set of things where it's like, hey, why don't I just get a locator by its text? The login button has the login text. It's going to be the only thing on the page that says login. Why don't I just get it based on that? You can do other things like roles. You can do things like test IDs in there. It's usually recommended to try to use those because they're a bit more user-friendly, a little bit more robust and resistant to changes on the page. All right, so we've done our interactions. Now it's time for verifications because testing is interaction plus verification. That's it. Think about it. Everything else is opinions and experience. Testing is interaction plus verification. You do something, you make sure it works. Given, when, then. Arrange, act, assert. We did something, now we got to make sure it worked. So what do we do with Playwright for that? There's this special function called expect. If anybody has done JavaScript or Node development, you probably know the expect function. The Playwright version of that in Python is very similar. So it's like, I get it. If you're new to it, no problem. Basically, it reads almost like plain language here. We're going to expect that the page, you put it in object into your expect, and there's that automatic waiting built in for the thing to resolve to become what it is or to time out where it isn't. We expect the page to have a particular title. I want the page to have the reminders, the Bulldoggy Reminders app title, and it's going to perform that as an assertion. I can expect the page to have a URL. Now this time I don't want to specify the entire URL because the base URL is part of it. What I really want to do is just kind of make sure that it has that /reminders path. So I'm using a regular expression to compile that. And I'm being safe about it with my escape character or my slash. We can also verify things not just on the page, but on elements on the page. And so expect my page for the locator given by this element, where the ID of that element is the Bulldoggy logo. That was that cute little pupper dog that came from DALL-E. Expect that my logo image is visible, that it appears on the page, right? Because if that doesn't show up, then I spent all that time going to ChatGPT and DALL-E so no one could see cute pictures of my puppy. Very sad. So we want to make sure that's visible. We also want to make sure the title's visible and it has a particular text value in it, so it's not just garbage in there. And also I want to make sure that the logout button is visible. And here I'm using a get by role locator. It's a button with the name logout. There's many more things we could check on the page. We'll get to that when we talk about visual assertions with AppleTools. But this is kind of, it's good enough. It's 差不多可以. Final check, this one is another one. Expecting my page locator for my reminders message will say something like reminders for Pythonista, because I want it to be personalized. F strings in Python, I love them. They help you do that interpolation with the string. So yep, thumbs up, awesome. So if we want to run this test, I'm going to expand my terminal a little bit here. Python, I'm in a virtual environment as well. I'm very low tech. I use the VNV module. It works for me for small projects. Python -m pytest. I always use -m pytest to make sure the library is all linked together. That's just me. Some people use pytest command. I do it this way. I'm the automation panda. I work with what works for me. And now I'm going to give the path to this UI test. So tests. PyTest will discover everything, but I have API tests and unit tests in here I don't want to include. So I'm going to say test _UI.py. And we're going to hope and pray that this works. So PyTest is doing its thing, and oh my gosh, it's already done. How fast did that go, folks? 1.46 seconds. I did not expect it to go that fast. Playwright is fast. Playwright is fast. It was over before I could finish talking. Let's do something a little more interesting here. I want to run this in headed mode so that we can actually see what happens. This comes from that plugin. So in CI you don't want to run headed. You want it headed. You want it to be fast and break things, right? But when you're developing, you might be like, let me make sure I can actually see what's going on here. So I'll run this in headed mode, and it was still too fast. Well, we saw it pop up. So now what I'm going to do is let's do slow-mo. You can actually slow it. Playwright is so fast you have to tell it to slow it down. Like, just let that sink in. It's so fast you have to tell it to slow down for you. So I'll give it 1,000 millisecond delay time. And so now we can see it. It does the thing. It performs the login. It's here. It checks the things, and then it'll close down. So that slow-mo adds 1 second to every interaction call. And so boom, it still passed. So yay, Playwright works. Awesome, awesome. Now, what can we do next? What I want to do is I want to show you how to enhance your Playwright tests with visual testing techniques. Has anyone done visual testing before? 5 minutes? Okay, we'll do this quick. Has anyone done visual testing before? So when we did these assertions here, it was good, but there's a big difference between checking if something is visible on the page and what it actually looks like. What visual testing can do, you can take a snapshot of your app and compare visual diffs over time so that you can actually catch, hey, this button went missing, or hey, my text is overlapping. Because even if things appear on the page, they might not appear right. So what you can do with that is you can add the AppleTools Eyes SDK. I am developer advocate at AppleTools. This is my company. But what it lets you do is it lets you capture visual snapshots instead of having to write out all of these assertions very explicitly. So I have another module here called Test Visual. And in here, what this code is showing There's a bunch of setup you do for the Applitools Eyes SDK. I don't want to get into that too much. I want to kind of show you the good parts. So you can set up your, you can read in your API key, you can set up your visual grid runner, set a batch name, example tests. You can set up different browsers and all that you want to run in the Applitools cloud. It'll capture snapshots and rerender them for you. You open and close your eyes, but here's the magic part. So here's that same login test. What I can do now, I can say navigate to the page, and now what I can do, like I can even check the login page. I can say eyes, check window, target the full thing, capture that visual snapshot. Then I can perform my login, okay? And then I can, once the reminders page is loaded, I can capture that snapshot as well. And so what will happen is these will capture visual snapshots over time that we can check. If I were to run this one, I'm going to test my visual test. And so this is going to run now. It's going to take a little bit longer because it needs to capture those visual snapshots. But if I come up to the Applitools Eyes dashboard now with this, you can see I have that batch running. I have the different browsers. Even though I'm running it only one time locally, Applitools is going to capture your snapshots and re-render them across these different browser configurations for responsive design. And hopefully, after a few seconds, we'll see this run. We can see it's going to capture those visual snapshots for you. And so I could do this again. I could change something. You could see it fail. But I think, Jay, we're running out of time. So I will leave it at that. Playwright is awesome. Check it out. You can do it in Python. Really sweet. If you want to really supercharge it, you can add Applitools Eyes for visual snapshots, detecting what's changed, be more meaningful. And with that, let me come back to my slides. Thank you so much for coming to my talk here today at the booth. If you want to catch me later, I'm giving a talk at 3:15 as well as an open space at 4. So thank you so much, everybody.